The North Atlantic Sea was unforgiving. For weeks, those men had sailed further and further west, leaving behind everything they knew. First Norway, then Iceland, then Greenland. Now, there was nothing left. At least, that is what they believed. The ocean seemed endless. Entire days passed without any sign of land. Only gray water, thick fog, and the constant sound of waves battering the ship's timber. For many on board, this expedition had already gone too far. Some began to wonder if anything truly existed beyond that horizon. Others feared something worse. Perhaps they were sailing toward the very edge of the world. But the man leading the voyage had no intention of turning back. His name was Leif Erikson, son of Eric the Red, explorer, warrior, and, without knowing it, a man about to step into history. Then, on a cold morning, while the mist still completely shrouded the sea, one of the crew members spotted something. A dark shape, distant, motionless. At first, no one believed it, but as the ship drew closer, there was no room left for doubt. It was not an island of ice. It was not a rock. It was land, a land that existed on no European map. And the most stunning part of all was that they had no idea someone was already watching them from that shore. As the ship approached the coast, silence took over the crew. It simply made no sense. Leif's men were used to the harsh landscapes of Iceland and Greenland. Rocks, ice, barren mountains. That was the world they knew. But before them stood something completely different. Forests, immense forests. Trees so numerous, they seemed to have no end. For men who lived in a land where timber was a precious resource, that sight must have seemed almost supernatural. And it wasn't just the vegetation. There were freshwater rivers, green meadows, unknown animals. For the first time in a long time, the Vikings believed they had found the perfect place, perhaps even a new home. But perfect lands rarely remain empty for long. In the following days, small groups began to explore the interior. They chopped wood, they examined the rivers, they mapped the coastline, and then they found something unexpected. Traces. Not many, but enough. Cut branches, strange markings on the ground, the remains of ancient campfires. Someone had been there, perhaps recently. Still, the expedition pressed on. Leif ordered the construction of a small settlement. Houses began to rise, tools were unloaded. But one morning, one of the men noticed his axe was gone. No one said much about it, until, 2 days later, the tool reappeared, in the exact same spot, as if someone had borrowed it and brought it back. The Vikings believed they had discovered an unknown land. In reality, they were the unknowns, and, hidden among the trees, watchful eyes were already tracking their every move. For a while, everything seemed to work. Construction progressed rapidly, timber was abundant, the hunting was good. Compared to Greenland, this new land felt like a gift from the gods. The Vikings gave it a name, Vinland, the land of wine. But as the small colony grew, a strange sensation began to spread among some of the men, the feeling that they were being watched. At first, it was just almost insignificant details. Tools misplaced, noises in the night, figures seeming to vanish into the trees. Then, one morning, an explorer found footprints in the mud. They were not Viking footprints, and they weren't leading into the forest. They were coming out of it. Leif knew that kind of situation well. In unknown lands, the greatest danger rarely came from nature. It came from people. Days later, it finally happened. According to the ancient Norse sagas, vessels approached the coast. They were not ships. They were small, hide-covered boats, rowed by men who had never seen Europeans before. The sagas called these people Skraelings. Who exactly these people were still divides historians to this day. On the other side, the locals observed something equally impossible. Tall men, bearded, dressed in thick wool, carrying objects of gleaming metal. Two worlds separated by thousands of miles stood face to face for the very first time. And, surprisingly, the first contact seems to have been peaceful. Pelts were traded, goods were offered. Red cloth sparked immense interest. For a few moments, it looked as though those two civilizations could coexist. But history shows that first contacts rarely remain peaceful for long. It took only a single misunderstanding, a single display of fear, a single gesture interpreted the wrong way. And there was another problem. The Vikings were few, very few. Because while the newcomers saw only small, isolated groups, they had no idea how many people actually inhabited those lands. For a time, the small colony in Vinland managed to survive, but something had changed. The constant feeling of being watched never went away. And then, inevitably, the tension exploded. No one knows exactly what went wrong. Perhaps it was fear, perhaps a misunderstanding, or perhaps both sides simply realized they were just too different. They spoke incomprehensible languages, they had unknown customs, they interpreted gestures in opposite ways. According to the accounts, a clash eventually broke out. Weapons were raised, arrows pierced the air. And for the first time, the Vikings realized something terrifying. They were not facing just a small group. They were surrounded by an entire population that knew those lands infinitely better than they did. The Norse possessed steel, military experience, extraordinary ships, but the locals possessed something even more valuable: numbers. Overwhelming numbers. Suddenly, Vinland stopped looking like an opportunity. It began to look like a trap. Every expedition became more dangerous. Every noise from the forest at night sounded like a warning. Every shadow among the trees could hide an enemy. And Leif understood a brutal reality. Discovering a new land was one thing. Dominating it was something else entirely. But the definitive blow against the Viking dream was yet to come. Because, at some point, the men of Vinland would make a decision that would change the course of history forever. In the end, the Vikings made the only decision that seemed possible. They abandoned Vinland. It didn't happen all at once, but gradually, the colony was left behind. The houses were emptied, the tools gathered, the ships prepared for the long voyage back north. After crossing an unknown ocean and finding a land rich in resources, the Norse simply gave up. And that raises a fascinating question. Why? The most likely answer is simple. The cost was too high. The distance to Greenland was enormous. The settlement was small. And constant conflicts made any expansion virtually impossible. The Vikings had discovered a new continent, but they did not have enough men to maintain it. So, little by little, Vinland vanished. Centuries passed. The stories survived only in the ancient Icelandic sagas. For a long time, many believed it was nothing more than a legend. Until, in 1960, archaeologists found something extraordinary in Lonso Meadows, in modern-day Canada. Remains of Norse buildings, tools, traces of a Viking presence. The sagas were right. Nearly 500 years before Columbus, Europeans had already set foot in America. But perhaps the greatest mystery isn't how they arrived. Perhaps it is imagining how history would have been different if they had stayed. We will probably never know. But one thing is certain. On that day, when the mist cleared over the North Atlantic, two worlds met for the first time, and history changed forever. If you like stories about encounters that change the destiny of humanity, subscribe to the channel, because in the next episode, we will find out why the mighty Roman Empire encountered a people who simply refused to be conquered.